Hello everyone. Today we are going to apply the macroeconomic analysis framework to the second capstone topic, economic inequality. This is one of the most fascinating topics in economics because we all want to be at the rich part of the wealth distribution. To start with, let's look at this famous figure of income distribution. From left to right, it lists countries from poorer to richer. The width stands for its population size. For example, India and China have bigger populations, so they are wider, but they are relatively poorer than countries like the UK and the US. From front to back, it lists individuals of each country from poorer to richer. The height stands for the annual income of each income class. This is a very informative figure to show cross-country inequality and within-country inequality. Here are two questions for you to think about. Question 1. If you can choose which country to be born, but you cannot choose the position on the income ladder, which country would you like to choose? Do you prefer a country like Botswana, where if you are lucky, you can be super rich, but if you're unlucky, you are really deprived? Or a country like Norway, where everyone is more or less equal? You can pause the video now and think about the question and then continue. Question 2. Now you can either choose country but not position in that country, or you can choose the position but not the country. Then which option would you like to choose? The essence of this question is that would you like to trade the uncertainty of cross-country inequality with the uncertainty of within-country inequality? You can pause me now and think about this question. This lecture is going to discuss issues on inequality and help you with the answers to these questions. This is where we are in the big picture of the module. It focuses on different types of household in terms of income and wealth. So it is not about the quantity of output, but the distribution of output. Like previous lectures, this lecture attempts to answer two sets of questions about inequality. The first two are descriptive analysis, attempting to understand the causes and effects of inequality. The other two are prescriptive analysis, attempting to offer some policy implications, such as how much inequality is optimal, and if it is too much, how to reduce inequality. Let's look at the first question, why inequality matters. This is actually a question about the effects of inequality. It matters because we all care about inequality. According to a survey carried out in the US, respondents are asked about two questions. The first is, what fraction of the wealth should go to the top 20%? This is basically their idealized world. On average, they think 30% of the wealth of the society should go to the top 20% richest. Well, those rich people who earn an income greater than 100K think it should be 40% because they have vested interests of being rich. Those who earn an income less than 50K think it should be lower than 30% for the same reason. The second question of the survey is, what is their estimated fraction in the real world? This is about their perceived reality. On average, people think that about 60% of the wealth belong to the top 20% richest. Therefore, they admit that the reality is far from their idealized world, even for those rich respondents. However, to everyone's surprise, the actual wealth share of the top 20% richest is actually 85%, much higher than the estimates. People care about inequality because we are not only self-interested, but also care about fairness. In the survey, there seems to be a consensus on the ideal or fair income distribution. However, the difference between an ideal world, the perceived world, and the real world are significant. In the ultimatum game introduced in the first semester, respondents would rather receive nothing to impose the same fate on the proposer than to agree to being treated unfairly. Reciprocity is part of the human nature, so inequality always matters in our decision-making. Nevertheless, we need to be aware of the distinction between fairness and equality. They are different but related in a way that may be contradictory to your intuition. For example, absolute equality is not a good thing, and it usually means absolute poverty. Why is that? If working and shirking end up with the same income, it is equal but not fair. People who work will eventually stop working, so no one will ever produce anything. Fairness means equality in opportunity and endowment, not equality in outcome. This slide shows you some more examples to distinguish between fairness and equality. The top 3 pictures come from a social media call for kids in different countries to post their toys. The first girl comes from a country in Africa, the second is from the US, and the third is from Japan. You can see the different endowments of these kids contributing to the cross-country inequality when they are older. The lower left figure illustrates how this inequality in endowments of the kids come from the unfair economic system of the adults. Turning to the individual level inequality, we can see similar patterns. If you ask different animals with different endowments to compete in climbing the tree, then it is a very unfair competition because monkeys are obviously more advantageous than elephants. Just like asking a poor kid with all these family burdens to compete with a rich kid with all the family resources. Inequality is just a surface phenomenon, while unfairness is the root cause. Now let's investigate what causes inequality. This slide summarizes a conceptual framework to analyze the causation of inequality. Technology and institutions are two long-term exogenous variables, which can directly contribute to inequality or indirectly via the effects on endowments. Let's use some examples to illustrate. First, there is a direct link between endowments and inequality. If initial endowments are not equal across individuals, then those with higher return endowments will receive higher income than others. This process is self-reinforcing because they can further invest in the endowments to guarantee their advantages. One such endowment is education. Imagine if your parents have more money to send you to private schools to receive better education, then you are more likely to find better jobs after graduation. Then your own kids will repeat your success and stretching the distance between different social classes. Now let's look at the indirect effects of technology and institutions on inequality. As we have seen in Unit 16, technological progress can cause creative destruction, leading to a change of value of previously useless skills or resources. For example, oil may be worthless before the 19th century, but it became essential after the Second Industrial Revolution. A huge wealth was created for those oil-rich countries. That is why the oil is also known as black gold. On the other hand, good institutions can guarantee equal opportunities and endowments to mitigate inequality, while corrupted institutions can exacerbate it. These institutional factors include inheritance tax, land reform, educational opportunities, intellectual property rights, and rule of law. In addition to the indirect effect via endowments, technology can directly affect inequality for its creative destruction on the labor market. Those who work in the old industry face greater risk of job loss, while those with innovative skills tend to accumulate more wealth. This is to be covered in details in Unit 21. Similarly, institutions can directly affect inequality too. It takes effect through the degree of competition in markets, bargaining power, taxes, and so on. They are discussed in different units of the textbook. Finally, there are interactions between technology and institutions too. On the one hand, technological progress can force institutions to evolve. For example, digital revolution urges legal protection of intellectual property rights. On the other hand, institutions can foster technological progress. These are discussed in details in Unit 21. Building on the cause and effect conceptual framework, we can analyze different types of inequalities in different markets, such as inequality due to family inheritance, endowments, and power. To help navigation, I put the section numbers for you to find the relevant parts. The key economic logic of all these analyses is the trade-off between equality and efficiency. It is a judgment, and different values lead to different answers. The capitalism, for example, tends to exacerbate inequality by boosting growth. It is also the policy tendency for the right-wing parties like the Conservative in the UK and Republican in the US. The socialism, on the other hand, tends to mitigate inequality but slowing down growth. This is also the policy tendency for the left-wing parties like the Labour in the UK and Democrats in the US. This slide introduces a paper on inequality I'm working on. Apart from those factors we have seen earlier, we identify the contribution of luck to inequality. Well, let's start with this thought experiment to make the point. Imagine there is an island with 1,000 residents, and each of them initially owns 3 units of coconuts. At the beginning of each period, every resident must hand in 1 unit of coconut to the chief of the island, who then distributes each coconut to all residents with equal opportunity. So there is no inequality in opportunity or endowments. Everyone have exactly the same endowment, 3 units of coconuts, and exactly the same opportunity of acquiring new income. Under this absolute equality of opportunities and endowment, let's say after 1,000 periods, what do you think the final wealth distribution would look like? You can pause me now and think about this question and choose one from the 4 choices. Note that the horizontal axis is the individuals sorted by their wealth, while the vertical axis is their wealth. So A means everyone still have exactly the same endowment like before, but B, C, and D means that there will be some inequality but in different shapes. In past years, many of you choose A because if everything is equal, including endowment and opportunity, why should there be any inequality at all? But the simulation shows that the eventual distribution is B. There are some very rich people at one end and very poor people at the other end, just like in reality. To summarize, even if the initial endowment and the opportunity of obtaining new income are perfectly equal, the final distribution of wealth is surprisingly unequal, purely due to the uncertainty, or luck. A more surprising result is that no matter what shape the original uncertainty follows, the resulting distribution of wealth always follows a normal distribution. This is due to the law of probability, the central limit theorem. In the paper, I offered some mathematical derivation of this conclusion, but obviously you don't have to understand these for your exam. So I put them into gray font. You're not required to read them whatsoever. I just want to show off how sophisticated the paper is. Now let's look at the third question of this lecture, how to measure inequality. As introduced in Unit 1, the Gini coefficient is a popular measure of inequality. A higher Gini coefficient means a higher inequality. Mathematically, it is defined as the ratio between the area above the Lorentz curve and the whole area below the 45-degree line. As shown in the graph, for example, it is equal to the area of A divided by the area of A plus B. To calculate the area of A and B, you will need some basic knowledge of geometrics. For example, the area of the right-angled triangle is equal to half multiplied by the two sides of the right-angled triangle, and the area of a trapezium is equal to half multiplied by the two sides multiplied by the height. Please take a review if you are not familiar with these two formulas. Now let's use this graph as an example to calculate the Gini coefficient. The trick is to calculate the area of A. We will calculate the area of B first, and then use the triangle area of the whole 45-degree line to subtract area B to get the area of A. So the question is transformed to calculating the area of B. B is made up of two components. The first component is the rectangle triangle to the left, and the second component is the trapezium on the right. Let's name the area of the first component B1 and the area of the trapezium B2. Apply the formulae in the previous slides for the area of a rectangle triangle and the trapezium. We are able to calculate the area for B1 and B2, which add up to 3,216. It is also straightforward to calculate the overall area below the 45-degree line, which is actually a right-angled triangle. Then subtract the area of B in the previous step, we will have the area of A. The Gini coefficient is therefore equal to A divided by the total area of A plus B, which is equal to 35.68%. This is, of course, a very simple example in which we only have two components of area B, but in practice, we may have hundreds or even thousands of points to be calculated. Then we can apply exactly the same technique to calculate the area of B and then A and then the ratio between the two. This slide gives you another example based on the previous example. After the redistribution, the Lorentz curve will shift upwards because the poorer gets some money from the richer. To calculate the Gini coefficient after the redistribution, you can use the same technique to decompose the area of the new B prime into three components. B1 is a right-angled triangle, B2 is a trapezium, and B3 is also a trapezium. You simply apply the area calculation formulae in this case again, and you will be able to calculate B prime and A prime and the ratio between the two. You can pause me now and take this as an exercise to check your understanding. The ultimate purpose of measuring inequality is to find out what is the optimal inequality. So if inequality is inevitable, then how much inequality is optimal to the society? I will introduce two answers to this question. John Rawls has addressed this question using a philosophical perspective. He proposed that a fair system should be designed impartially, and this can be done through the veil of ignorance. So if you are going to design a fair social system, then you should not know what you are in this society. In other words, you must be ignorant or ignore who you are in this society. For example, when you design the policy related to disability, you should not stand on the side of the disabled population or on the non-disabled population. You should be impartial. Despite a very good idea, this approach of the veil of ignorance is not practical. You can't really forget who you are in the society when you design the society. Economists, on the other hand, are more practical than philosophers. We admit that people are not impartial, and the design of a fair society depends on the optimal trade-off between equality and efficiency. We argue that too much equality means insufficient incentive, so it is not efficient. But too much inequality means less fairness or less equality. So technically speaking, we can have a maximization problem as in all economic problems. We can maximize the social welfare subject to the feasible set. The question is, how do we define the social welfare function, and how can we find the feasible set? In this diagram, we have two parts of the optimization problem. The blue curve is the feasible frontier, which are all the combinations of the income of the rich and the income of the poor. By definition, the income of rich must be higher than the income of the poor, so all the combinations must lie above the 45-degree line. At one extreme, point E is where the income of rich and income of poor equalized. Point R is the Rawls idea, which maximize the income of the poor. It is also known as maximize the minimum or maximum rule. Point B is the optimum, which maximize the social welfare, represented by this red indifference curve. Point A is where the maximum average income is achieved, because at this point, the slope is equal to -1, implying an 1-to-1 trade-off ratio between the incomes of the rich and the poor. Point F is the maximum feasible income of the rich at the cost of the income of the poor. And finally, point D is the minimum feasible income of the poor, below which the poor may not be able to survive and there will be a revolution. Finally, let's address how to reduce inequality if it is too high. The most effective way is redistribution using taxes and transfers, so that the rich can give out some of their income to the poor to reduce the inequality. But this is a reduction of inequality in outcome. To encourage a fairer economic system, it is necessary to encourage greater equality of endowment and raising the value of the endowments of the poor. This is to increase the equality of opportunities. And with equal opportunity, the equality can then be achieved automatically. One important example is to improve the access to financial markets for the poor. Without financial leverage, many poor people are trapped in poverty. Think about a poor graduate with no money from their parents. He has no deposit, he has no house, and he has to work his ass off to pay for the rent every month. There is no money left after all the bills, so he will never have his own home. However, if he successfully gets a mortgage and pay off his mortgage monthly, he will have his own home as soon as he got a job. Therefore, banks and credits are a great invention when it is done correctly. Finally, to emphasize the difference between equality and fairness, I close the lecture by this picture. Equality is not the purpose, it is just the outcome, and fairness is the way to achieve equality. To summarize, this lecture tries to answer 4 questions. The first 2 are descriptive analysis, trying to figure out the causes and effects of inequality. The other 2 questions are normative analysis, trying to answer some policy implications, like how to measure it, and what is the optimal inequality, and if it is too high, how do we reduce inequality? Please use these slides as your navigator to read the core Unit 19. Have fun!